To be buried while alive is, beyond question, the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen to the lot of mere mortality. That it has frequently, very frequently, so fallen, will scarcely be denied by those who think. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where the one ends and where the other begins? Greetings, Poe fans, and welcome back to one of our degree episodes. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I'm Jeanie Smith.
And
we are the Potastic 2.
Yay!
Hey! I was a little confused there because I'm like, it's been a while.
I know.
Well, we usually do that at the
old school.
We usually do it at the end, not at the beginning. So I guess that's why.
Oh,
because we do it at the end in the Poe discussions, but then we do it at the beginning on the Poe episodes.
Right.
So I got confused.
Yes. Well, I decided to take us back old school. So.
All right. I like it. I'm good with that. I like old school, which actually goes with what we're talking about. We're going really old school.
Yes, we are. We're going way back and way back.
Yes, we're going into way backs. We're going back to the Poe times.
We are going to talk about funeral practices, mostly during the Victorian era, but there are some things that we'll bring in that are from previously before those years. So,
yeah, we're going to run into little things basically around the 1800s.
Yes.
So we're going to start not little, as early as 1800 as the first year.
Yeah.
But we're going to cover things that happened.
Yeah.
Because the customs that we know today that goes on in the funerals aren't exactly the same. There are still some traditions that are kept.
Right.
But it was highly different from back in those days to now.
Oh, absolutely.
For one, the technology has changed, medical has changed, those types of things. So, yeah, we're going to talk about that because, unfortunately, this month is the dedicated death of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, and we are actually recording the night of his death date. Today is October 7th. So we thought this was very apropos to talk about this. And we are also going to be reading The Premature Burial for Poe Unplugged for October 28th for our discussion. So it's all tied into lots of spooky, lots of preparing for Halloween. We've got the ghoul on. So
yes, I like that. We got the ghoul on. Yeah. That's right.
So I guess where we should begin is where the Victorian era began in 1837 and which lasted all the way into 1901. And
yes, with the death of Queen Victoria.
Yes, and she pretty much set the stage for mourning practices for that entire period of time when her husband Albert died in 1861. She stayed in mourning for basically the rest of her life, you could kind of say.
Yeah. So, and because Queen Victoria was so loved and one of the, she was the longest serving monarch up until Queen Elizabeth II.
Yes.
Who just recently died. So not only was she beloved, but the problem that was so horrible with her that she loved Prince Albert so much that his death in 1861, she still mourned up until her death in 1901.
Yes. Yes. And even though that was England, those customs came over into America, and we kind of basically copied what the British did.
Yeah, and the thing about it is we have to go back to the civilization or the colonization of the United States because the majority of the 13 colonies were colonized by Britain.
Right.
Not all of them,
Right.
You know, we've got a lot of Dutch influence. We've got a lot of German,
Hmm.
Irish. So there was a bunch of others, but mostly it was British. Spanish was most of the southern and western.
Right. Right.
But so the British brought over a lot of their own traditions early in the colonization days.
Hmm.
And some of that also transferred over from the problems they had with the Black Plague
Yes, absolutely.
and being buried alive
Hmm.
because, well, there was leprosy, catatonia, those different diseases that no one knew about. And unfortunately, a lot of people got buried that weren't dead.
Right.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. They were either in, like you say, a catatonic state, they were in comas,
mhm.
and it was their pulse was too faint, and they really didn't have the medical abilities to know all of these things in order to determine, are they dead yet?
Yeah, because most of the early medical practices, like a stethoscope and those kinds of things, they were pretty basic
Mm,
that they still couldn't pick up things that were so faint. And before
right.
then, they didn't understand how to check the carotid artery for a pulse
Hmm.
and the heartbeat. Now, if the heartbeat slows down to a certain point, even if you put your ear on someone's chest,
Right.
you won't be able to hear it.
Hmm.
Uh, but all that kind of was a precursor up to Queen Victoria's days when she started the traditions that most followed into funeral parlors.
Yes.
You know, the deaths and, you know, the laying out and the families and those types of traditions. But
Hmm.
before that, on the side of the medical,
Hmm.
you have to understand that embalming wasn't a thing they did.
Right.
Now, sometimes they would, like we were talking earlier before we started recording, some of the medical practices was to bloodlet. For instance, someone was sick, that if
Yeah.
they, you know, this was before modern medicine even started coming out, they would use leeches, they would actually cut open veins, they would drain the blood out of people. So sometimes that they would do that. And that was the first forms of embalming that got started because they would partially bloodlet and
Hmm.
that would drain the body of
Yeah.
most of it because our bodies only hold, I think it's five or 6 pints. I can't remember.
Isn't it 8 or 9? I thought it was 8 or 9.
No, I'm
You
pretty
keep
sure. Well, maybe.
you keep talking and I will look it up because
Yeah, I can't remember. I know that if you lose up to five, you pretty much won't survive. So, but anyway, so part of the early points that most people need to understand is hospitals weren't the very first hospital that was created in Philadelphia was done so by Benjamin Franklin. He was one of those that pushed it to be made, and mostly it was a place where, unfortunately, a lot of people would drop off mentally ill,
Mhm.
uh, those that didn't have any family, the poor, because most of hospitals was only used for poor people. The
Mhm.
rich people did not, they had doctors that came to their home and they got taken care
Right.
of in their home.
Right. Exactly.
So, and that's one of the things I wanted to point out about poor Poe, how he ended up in the hospital was because he was found on the streets and
Right.
he was poor. So
If
he
he
didn't.
had been taken to a home and a
Mhm.
doctor assisted him there, would he have survived? That would be a question we could
Yeah.
put out there, but we won't answer that tonight because we don't
No,
have an answer.
no. That was just one point I wanted to point
Yes.
out about him being
Yes.
taken to the hospital.
Absolutely.
But the other thing that I wanted to basic on is like if you died in the early 1800s, you were taken to the home, you were laid out in the parlor,
Hmm.
and a family member sat with you for 3 days.
Right.
They
At
they
least.
did that because just in case you woke up and you weren't really dead.
And that's why they called them wakes, because it was not only for friends and family to come and
Hmm.
say their goodbyes to their loved one. It
Hmm.
was also to see and make sure, was the deceased,
Person dead.
yes, going to wake.
Yes.
So,
See if they were going to wake up. So that's why
exactly,
most of today, the tradition of having a wake after someone's been buried, that's paying homage to those days when you had to sit and for 3 days and make sure they were really dead.
exactly.
So,
Yes, absolutely.
and also it was respectful and someone sitting with the body and a way for them to help ward off evil spirits that may try to
Mhm.
take over the body.
Oh, yes. And I was going
And,
to say, while you're talking about that, Jeannie,
uh-huh.
let's talk about some superstitions of the
Uh-huh.
Victorians. They were quite a superstitious bunch, and, rightfully so, because there were so many unknowns that, weather played factors into hysteria. And I'm not just talking about why some women were called hysterical and would have to be put in
Mhm.
asylum or sanitarium or anything like that, but just in general, there's so many unknowns with medicine and just what they believed with religion and things like that. They were superstitious. And so
Mhm.
they did all these different things to make sure that they were going to survive, hopefully. And so one of the things that was a superstition was when they carried the body like out on to put onto the horse-drawn carriage to take the
Mhm.
body to the cemetery. It was placed on a bier, bier, and they would make sure that the body went out feet first out of the house. That way, the deceased could not call
Mhm.
back and try to bring someone with them. I thought that was really
Yes.
interesting. So,
And
yeah,
that goes along with the way that they're buried.
yes, yes.
And I learned this that the tradition wasn't just for didn't just carry over into funerals today,
Hmm.
but it carried over into my work as a cashier
Okay.
because with money, I was taught when I first started working way back in the day
Hmm.
as a cash register person, I was taught that the money you had to place it to where the dead presidents,
Hmm.
their heads were facing to the east. Basically, they were
Okay.
facing to the right.
Okay.
That goes with the superstition
Hmm.
of these days, like you were talking about. Not only did they have to go out of the house feet first, but when they're buried, their heads are buried towards the east.
Interesting. Okay.
Their feet is facing the west, and that is a way of where they're protecting
Hmm.
them from becoming possessed, kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. That makes
And
sense.
so, yeah, and so that was one of the things I thought was very interesting. I was like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that I was taught all these years ago that when I used money, because the dead presidents' heads that are on there, I always had to face their heads that were facing east. I always wondered why.
And now you know.
Exactly. And a lot of people need to understand that coffins were not common practice either,
No. And the
because early settlers, they didn't
yeah,
have that way. So they used to just use wool or linen dipped in wax, blankets, quilts,
exactly.
wrap the body, and coverings that were supplied by women or family. And
Right.
then the first coffins came later on when they had to carve out hollow tree sections to use them for transport.
Right. And the first coffin makers were originally cabinet makers that
Mm-hmm.
saw the need for coffins, something to bury someone in. And so
Yep.
they ended up becoming casket makers and undertakers. And from what
Yep.
I was reading, and this is for my second book coming out soon, um, I did a lot of research on this, and the term undertaker is not just something creepy and weird or a wrestler on WWE. And I just
Yeah.
did that for funny. But it means that this particular gentleman would undertake everything that the family needs. So they were the
Yes.
cabinet maker who made the casket. They, made sure that people were invited to the funeral, and
Mm-hmm.
they had all the accoutrements of the mourning crepe and dress and all of the things they needed. And so I thought that was kind of fascinating too.
Yeah, because they were basically the do all
Yeah.
they were undertaking all those duties
Hmm.
to help the families
Yeah.
get
Take all
everything
that
taken
off of
care of.
them. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
And
so,
another wonderful thing is many of us don't even think why we call living rooms anymore.
hmm
And it's because that in the early days, when you laid out a person after their death for the family to come in and the community to come in and say their respects, they would put them in the parlor. That's what they would call the parlors.
hmm
But once they created funeral homes and people started coming to funeral homes where people were laid out, that's when the families changed the name to the living rooms
yes.
because it was no longer where you laid out the dead.
Right, exactly. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, I'm going to go back to a superstition, but I also have
Mm-hmm.
something else about the laying out of the dead in the parlor too.
Okay.
So, if you've ever gone to an old historical mansion, especially when they do put on the funeral, the stages of mourning in the house,
Mm-hmm.
curtains are always closed, all mirrors are draped. And
Mm-hmm.
that's because the superstition then was that if the dead had, like, they were afraid that the dead soul would be trapped in the window or the mirror, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wanted to prevent that. And then there was also a superstition that while the deceased was laying in state, or laying in, I don't want to say that 'cause
Mm-hmm.
that's really more for a celebrity or a president, but they're
Yeah.
laying, being, for the wake, that if you saw your reflection in the house of the deceased, that you might be next. So that was another very good reason to cover up the mirrors and the windows.
Yes. And they also laid any portraits down.
Yes, absolutely. Same
Yeah. Any port
thing.
all portraits were laid flat on the surface.
To make sure there's no
And
possessions and all of these
exactly.
things. So the other part I was going to talk about with the families gathering around their loved one who is deceased is
Mm-hmm.
that in 1839 the daguerreotype had come out, and
Mm-hmm.
so it became very fashionable after the daguerreotype was popularized for families. They really, most families could not afford to take pictures before someone died, but it was a little bit cheaper after someone did die in the family. So they would take these pictures around the dead body. And some of
Mm-hmm.
them were animated so much they would use like puppetry skills and things like that with wires to hold, the person up. And so they might look a little odd in the picture if you've ever seen any pictures of deceased people in them. And
Mm-hmm.
they're very creepy. They're very, very creepy.
Yes, and yeah, and that's kind of one of the reasons where another superstition of I don't really want to say clairvoyance
Okay.
or mediumship or stuff like that,
Yeah.
but it kind of those days when you had the I know gypsies get a bad name for this, but
Mhm.
they were not really seen as a they were roaming, and so they were not very well received in most of the communities because they didn't settle down, and they would call them thieves and all this kind of stuff. But they
Right.
like to use those types of superstitions their own way of getting money, and some of that kind of helped push because of those photographs, those double exposures that they got printed onto, and they would take advantage, especially of the families that could afford the pictures,
Right. Right.
so they would see that and they would wait. Now, one of the things I need to correct the other way, the opposite way,
Okay.
um, being buried, they buried the feet would be facing east, not the head. And the reason
Okay.
was that was the Christian belief, because during the Christian, for the final call to judgment, it is said that it will come from the east,
Okay. That makes sense.
because that's where Jerusalem and, you know, all the Rome and all those things. So they were facing, their feet were facing east, so that way they could come up and be resurrected.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that does
So,
make sense. Well, and
yeah.
one thing that to add, we were talking about pints of blood. So
Hmm.
looking it up on just a scale, and it all depends on
Hmm.
age, depends on size of the person.
Hmm.
Anyone can have anywhere from 8 to 12 pints of blood. And I
Okay.
would think that somebody really, really tall, very large person probably would have up on that upper scale. And 10 and a half is the average. But I've always heard like 9 pints, 8 pints, something like that.
Yeah. That's usually a good average, but I did know that if you lose more than 5 pints of blood, that you basically, your body can't uh,
Without a
make,
transfusion. Yeah.
yeah, without a
Yeah.
transfusion, the body can't replenish it that much,
Oh, yeah.
because many people don't understand that the blood is being made in the bone marrow.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's really weird, but yeah. So I wanted the Christian faith was when they were buried with their feet facing east.
Okay. All
So
right.
yeah, I've never been good with directions.
That's okay. It's all
I
good.
always told everybody I'm directionally challenged. But some of the other kind of superstitions and everything, they would say that if the rain falls on a funeral procession, the deceased will go to heaven.
Yes, I've heard that before too.
And the clap of thunder after the burial means the soul of the deceased has arrived in heaven.
Okay.
Now, they did say it was bad luck to meet a funeral procession head on,
I've
because
heard
if you
that
cannot turn
too.
around, you hold on to a button until it passes.
Oh, and I haven't heard that about the button. That's interesting.
Mhm. That way you can hold on to something to keep you grounded.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense.
Now, I never understood this one. It says never wear anything new to a funeral, especially shoes.
Hmm. Well,
Doesn't say why.
okay. And I mean the now in funerals today, they're more casual than they used to be. I remember, I
Yeah.
I do believe, and I don't quote me on this, but I think the first funeral I did go to was my father's when I was 10.
Hmm.
And, people in the early 80s still dressed very formal, like church attire to go to funerals. It was, you wore black, navy, or gray. And today, people come after work sometimes, to visitations and things. And so
Hmm.
there is a looser definition of attire that people wear. I mean, I've seen jeans and things like that. But in Victorian times, it was still the formal dress, and it was
Hmm.
you better have on black or very dark gray.
Yes. Yes. It had to be very respectful
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
very formal. And
Oh, yeah.
that's the first funeral I ever attended. I was 3 years old, and it was my grandfather's funeral, and
Hmm.
he was buried Easter weekend. He was buried the Saturday before Easter, and I wore my Easter dress with my white gloves, because
Okay.
I had to be very dressed and very formal, and so we
Absolutely.
wore our Easter dresses to the funeral.
Okay.
So,
Makes sense. That makes
uh,
perfect sense.
yeah, and it's very odd. Now, the one thing I do want to go back to, in the early days, when the body was laid out, they were laid out on blocks of ice.
Yes.
Now, in today's world, we know that most bodies are held in morgues, which are giant freezers,
Hmm.
because it preserves the body.
Right.
Well, in those days, they had no way to preserve the bodies, because they did not have the funeral homes, they didn't have morgues. So they would lay out big blocks of ice and they would lay the bodies on them to
Right.
keep them preserved for those 3 days.
Yeah.
And many of us, I always wondered why they would lay the flowers on top of the caskets,
Hmm.
how they would have those big lay
Yeah.
of, and most of the time they're roses or lilies, something extremely fragrant.
Hmm.
Well, that goes back to those times also.
Right.
They did not do a lot of the wreaths and a lot of the flowers and stuff, but in the days, they would always light scented candles
Hmm.
and they would have very fragrant lilies or roses in the parlors for two reasons. One, that those were the only respectful flowers they had, and the candles would stay lit because they didn't have electricity and they
Right.
had to keep light on during those 3 days. But it doubled down because it helped keep the decomposing body smell,
Yes. Yeah.
because remember, they weren't embalmed.
No.
So, and many people don't realize what happens to a body when it does start breaking down. We won't go into that because that's just a little
Right.
too much.
Yes. Oh,
Um,
yes. And I was going to say too, and one of the other things that mentioning back to the people who were watching, grave watchers to make sure, like when they were lying in the parlor,
mhm.
or laying in the parlor, that they also, when the casket was closed, some of them that could afford it would have a glass pane. If you watch The
Yes.
Premature Burial with Ray
Hmm.
Milland, it's directed by Roger Corman, that they do have that in that casket to where if they do wake up, they'll be seen, like, because they're going to be like facial, probably freaking out.
Yeah, because in those with the rich people, they usually had mausoleums. They didn't really get buried underground very much.
Yeah.
And one of the other things also that had ties back into the English traditions
Hmm.
during the Black Plague, because the leprosy, the catatonia, and all that, and the Black Plagues, people were getting declared dead that weren't dead.
Hmm.
So they would, even after they buried them, they would tie the string around their finger
Yes.
and link it to a bell up near the grave at the top. And so if someone woke up, somebody was always sitting there, because in England, they didn't sit in the parlor with them, they sat at the graveside. And
Exactly.
if that bell was rang in those 3 days, they would immediately run over there and dig them up.
Yes.
But I think it was more towards when America put in the tradition of burying someone 6 feet deep.
Hmm.
That wasn't the way it was in England. It more or less came about over here more because of the land and the area and the animals and everything. They
Yeah.
would bury you 6 feet deep because of grave robbing and to
Yes.
protect the bodies from animals. Because remember, they didn't bury them in coffins,
Right.
they were buried just wrapped up in something.
Yeah. And speaking of grave robbers, I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
So the during this time frame, a lot of medical universities needed real bodies, real dead
Mhm.
bodies, real live dead bodies to,
Live dead bodies.
I mean that oxymoronical, I guess, if that's a word. I just made it.
We'll create it. There we go.
Yes. And because they had to study the anatomy, you can see
Hmm.
pictures all day long, but until you have actually dissected a human body, I have never done this, but just
Hmm.
saying that, um, the medical students would not be able to truly understand human anatomy. And
Hmm.
so you did have resurrection men who would go and dig up, grave rob dead bodies once they were
Yep.
in the ground. It was not necessarily because, like, you had true grave robbers that would try to steal any jewelry or mementos left in the coffin for,
Hmm.
reselling. But this was the resurrection men were all about digging up these bodies and selling them to medical schools. And so the grave watchers were also there not only to make sure that someone wasn't buried alive, but to also make sure that the graves were intact and secure from these resurrection men. And two of the most famous are Burke and Hare, and they did their reign of resurrecting, as we'll say, from January to October of 1828, and they would sell the bodies to a man named Robert Knox. And they were caught. And if I remember correctly, wasn't it Burke that did most of the work? Like he was more of the maniacal one of the two.
Yes, if I
If
remember correctly,
I
yes.
remember correctly.
I mean, them robbing graves was pretty ridiculous in the first place, but
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
that was macabre in its own way.
Well, and then to tie into that, I thought it was really interesting because there were some things that helped end that practice. So that was in
Hmm.
1828. And there was the Anatomy Act of 1832, which allowed for the legal donations of unclaimed bodies to medical schools. So people didn't have to go out trying to find dead bodies. Well, then but Burke and Hare actually killed people too.
Yeah,
Just add that.
they went above and beyond. Let's put it there.
Yes. Yeah, they
They couldn't wait for supply and demand. They
no, they
demanded the
created,
supply.
yeah, they
Yeah.
created it. Yes. And so, and then also this act of Anatomy Act of 1832 allowed people to have their body donated to
Hmm.
science after they died. And so I
Yeah.
did not know that. That was something I learned that was new. I was thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, and it also, especially in big cities that didn't have a lot of open fields to do burying, because that's, if you were unclaimed, like Jane Doe's, John Doe's,
Right.
those actual names didn't come around until later,
Right. Right.
but they would throw you in Potter's Field. I mean, they
Yes.
literally would stack you up like cords of wood and
Hmm.
then just bury you in mass graves.
Yeah.
So, with this act of 1832, they donated the more viable bodies
Right.
to medical, and that would help. I hate to say it, but because they were getting dissected and
Hmm.
taken apart, it was another way of recycling. I hate to say it that way,
Right.
but
But
it
yeah.
was the best way of recycling, especially if they were running out of room.
Well, running out of room, and it was probably, I hate to say it like this too, but more cost effective to donate a body to
Hmm.
medical college than to have to dig a grave when, especially like if they were running out of places to bury.
Yeah, and especially this was a good industrial age time also. And a lot of people were, especially children,
Hmm.
were still working in the industries and everything. So getting burned, and sometimes they would cremate bodies,
Hmm.
especially if they were killed at factories. They just kind of burned the rest of it. And
Yeah.
that was because think about it, if anybody's ever burned yourself or anything, the smell of burnt skin can really
Oh,
just
yeah. Yeah.
um, but yeah, those things that many people, you don't know unless you look them up, like you said. We
Yeah.
didn't know that they passed that, but it kind of makes sense that they would need to
Mhm.
curb the grave robbing and the overstocking of
Yeah.
bodies. And a
I think
lot of
Burke
people
and Hare
didn't
put
have
them over
family.
the edge.
Yes, they ran them down.
Yes.
Uh, and a lot of families, or a lot of people didn't have families.
Very
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
they usually were here. They came to America to get away from something.
Hmm.
Like, Georgia was a whole colony that was created for debtors that were released out of prison
Hmm.
just to give them a second chance.
Right.
So they
Yeah.
usually didn't come with family or anything like that.
Hmm.
But it's amazing. a lot of the things that we have today came from something so dark.
Yes. I,
Um,
I
but
know.
one of the things that I didn't realize that I want to turn to something a little bit better to talk about
Okay.
rather than, you know,
Well, and I was also going to suggest going into a lighter subject too. So let's hear what yours is.
well, one of the things that in my neck of the woods and yours too, after funerals, a lot of people drop off food for the
Yes.
family.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the early days, it was the other way around. The families would make funeral biscuits,
Okay.
and these funeral biscuits were given out after the service, and all the procession went to the cemetery and everything. The deceased would be buried, and then the formal mourning period would begin.
Mm-hmm.
So then the funeral biscuits would then be handed out to everyone that came out to mourn the death or
Okay.
visit. And it also, the biscuits were given out to take home as a remembrance of the deceased or
Interesting.
sent to those who were unable to attend the funeral. So
Okay.
even if they came to mourn, but they were given to those to attend the funeral, they were wrapped in white paper and sealed with a black wax. Some were
Oh,
printed with the deceased's name and date of death or lines from hymns or Bible verses. So
okay.
this got me to thinking that, you know, nowadays we make those programs that
Yes.
has the date, the death, and then they have Bible verses or sayings or something on it. And I'm like, we all get those when we go visit
Yes.
people in the funeral homes.
Mhm.
So these kind of took place of the funeral biscuits.
Yes.
And the first, let's see, Mrs. Beecher's Domestic Recipe Book, 1846. You can find the recipe, and here's it sounds pretty good. Sounds a lot like hardtack from the Civil War, like
Mhm.
before the Civil War. 1 cup of molasses, a half a cup of sugar, half a cup of butter, half a cup of warm water, butter melted with it, small teaspoonful of pearlash. I've never heard of pearlash.
I'd have to,
Dissolved in the water.
okay.
2 tablespoons of ginger, caraway seeds, and sufficient flour to roll out. The dough should be stiff, knead it well, and roll into sheets, cut into round cakes, and bake in a moderate oven.
They sound,
So,
they sound almost more savory with a hint of sweet with
yeah. Well,
molasses.
and
Yeah.
one of the things is that the British call biscuits cookies
Right. Right.
or cookies biscuits.
Yeah.
So when I was reading this, I'm like, oh, this is a cookie that we think about now.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but I thought that was very interesting that
It
the family
is.
gives this out to the
Yeah.
mourners.
That
Uh,
you're right. The little paper like pamphlet almost of the
mhm.
deceased, information about them. It does sound like it replaced the biscuit.
Yeah. Yeah, because, you know, when I read that some were printed with the deceased name and date of death and
Hmm.
lines from hymns or Bible verses, I was like,
Yeah.
wrapped in white paper and sealed with black wax. And most of the time, those are little little just
Hmm.
pamphlets.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, hey,
That's
kind
very,
of makes sense. It
yeah.
kind of flipped where everybody brings food now to the family instead of the family giving food.
Right.
So,
Huh. Well,
but yeah, I wanted to bring that out.
yeah,
So I thought that was interesting.
I'm glad you did. What I wanted to go back to is we started a little bit with this with Queen Victoria, and you
Hmm.
made a mention just a minute ago of when the official mourning period began.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
so the way people dressed and the way people went out in public was dictated by if you were in mourning, and it all depended
Hmm.
on which relative had passed away. So, like if it was a
Hmm.
woman, women would stay in mourning a whole lot longer than men. And so
Yes.
if the woman's husband passed away, she was expected to wear for one full year the full black, a widow's veil or a widow's cap.
Hmm.
Also say widow's weeds. That's hard to say very, very fast.
Yeah, that's a little tongue twister right there.
But usually the dresses were in like silk or something like that because they didn't have like a store where they could.
Mm-mm.
Some funeral parlors actually provided these types of dresses and things, but a lot of times they made them themselves. They didn't have like they could go out and buy several because obviously they were expensive. But they would wear this full attire with all the crepe, and crepe, especially on the veil, was very detrimental because of the fibers from the fabric that are in crepe were somewhat poisonous a little bit sometimes.
Hmm.
So it would make women sick. But anyway, but where I'm going with this is they would have to wear this for a full year if their husband passed. And then they would go into half mourning for one full year where they would have to wear like grays, sometimes lavender,
Hmm.
and that would be for the second year they were in mourning. And then after that, it wasn't really rigid, anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
and during the second year, didn't they also weren't they able to do like a half a veil?
yes, yeah, it wasn't
Yeah.
as serious as a full. I'm sure some women probably did wear a full one, but yeah, I think you could do
Mhm.
a half. But the only place in that 2 year period they were allowed to go was church.
Yes. And one of the things was the servant had to stay with them.
Yes, and they were, depending on how wealthy the family was, the servants would also appear in the mourning wear as well.
Hmm. Yes. Now the men, of course, did not have as strenuous. They
Right.
Now anybody in the family would be required to wear black
Yes.
for whatever period of mourning for whichever relative they were mourning for
Right.
at that time. Whether it be like I think it was
It
6 months if it was like a
yeah.
sibling
It was like
or a
the
parent.
hierarchy was like spouses, then
Yes.
parents, then siblings, and then aunts, uncles, children, something like that. And like
And
the,
I think grandparents were right up below, or either
yeah,
below or above the parents. I
I
can't
believe
remember.
so. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so they would have to wear that depend on, but men only had to, I
A
think, was it six
dark
months?
Yeah, and they had to wear a dark suit. They had to wear like black gloves. The
Hmm.
hat band around their hat had to be black crepe, and
Yes,
cravat, which is the like their neckerchief, I
neckerchief.
call them, that had to be black as well. I
Yes,
think,
and but they did not. And if it was a wife they were mourning, they didn't have to mourn as long. They could leave the house to go to work because they had to support the family.
right,
But they were allowed less time to mourn because they were required to find another wife
yes. So if, you hate to say it, if
to
a man
support the
was,
children. Yeah,
yeah, if a man knew someone he wanted to marry a week later, that would have been okay. Like it wasn't looked frowned upon as much. I think that it was like I think a 2 to 6 month period officially,
hmm,
but they would allow things more for men than for women. Women had to,
yes,
like they would have been,
adhere to those
yes,
guidelines.
yes. And so, even if a woman knew who she wanted to marry after a year, she still had to wait out that period to not be shunned from society.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they would take hair from the dead bodies
Hmm.
and they would put them and make them into brooches that they would wear. They would
Yes.
either take care, put them in lockets, they would make brooches.
Mhm.
Um,
They also did shadow boxes. They did
mhm.
wreaths. They even made corsages that they would wear with the hair. And
Mhm.
now, women during the mourning period were not supposed to be wearing any kind of jewelry unless it was like black, which very few of them had. I know that, like, just from doing research for my second book, there was. there were some funeral homes that would have the jewelry for them, and some jewelers would do that, but that was rarer than some of the other things that they would make. But yeah, but those basically those were mementos to honor their loved one.
Yeah, and they would wear them and even pass them down
Mm-hmm. Yes.
as a way to honor the deceased
Yeah,
for many years later.
exactly. And yeah, it just, and I think today some people even do put ashes in lockets, or, a lock of hair in a locket and
Hmm.
things like that. Um, but again, the mourning periods nowadays, I don't really think there's any rhyme or reason. Like there's no etiquette followed in much of our culture in the United States for staying in mourning. I think some
Mm-mm.
people that I know back when we were growing up, I think if someone's spouse had died, they probably would wait 6 months to a year before marrying again. But
Hmm.
nowadays, I don't, there's not too many people that shun people for that in today's society
No,
at all.
a lot of it has to do with the area
Mm-hmm.
that you're in, the
Right.
traditions that are still observed in those areas.
Right.
I know from my neck of the woods, literally,
Mm-hmm.
where I was growing up, my grandfather, my dad's dad, his first wife died, and he remarried my dad's mom within like 6 months.
Yeah.
So he was remarried in within 6 months because he already had another child. So
Gotcha.
he
Okay.
needed, that was a requirement that because he was the sole supporter,
Right.
he had to remarry in order to be able to have someone take care of the child because he
That
didn't
makes
have any other family.
that makes sense.
So that would be kind of that kind of tradition. But as for guidelines of what was required in today's traditions, no, I don't think there's still frowned upon with certain people. I know after my mom died, um, my dad never remarried, but he started going places with a lady from the church, and
Right.
I know it caused a big rigmarole, for lack of a better
I was
word.
gonna say
But
ruckus.
yeah, that's another word.
Yeah.
Um, but nothing ever. It was just companionship.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, the man was like, he was in his 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it's the generational gaps, I think it
I
is,
I think so too. Yes.
along with traditions, along with the place and everything. But yeah, there's no set grieving that
No.
you can do for anyone.
No.
Um,
And I
it,
was gonna also add that children weren't required to wear a certain type of
mm-mm.
color or dress for any amount of time. They kind of really didn't participate in any of these formal customs.
Yeah, they were kind of left out. I mean, they were given the
Mhm.
chance to see the body
Yeah.
and knew that they were gone, but that was it.
Yeah.
They were pretty much kept out of the loop.
From it. Yeah. Absolutely. Or
Yeah.
sheltered is a better word.
Sheltered. Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah. Um,
But
so before we get into more about like the embalming, because we were going to talk about that, and
yes, because that kind of progressed
yes,
once, because we're moving into the middle 1800s, which
right.
that's where all this starts developing more.
So the only other thing I was going to mention about just the practices part of it
Mhm.
was that during this time frame in the Victorian period, large ornate grave markers were used for just the actual tombstone or gravestone, however you want to say it, as well as, like Jeannie was saying, family mausoleums and such like that. And nowadays, it kind of fell out of fashion after the Victorian period, for one, cost. And
Hmm.
some people were even put in unmarked graves. Think about Poe when his first burial, because he had three, his
Yep.
first burial, he had an unmarked grave. And so, because his family couldn't afford it.
Yeah,
So,
and that's one of the reasons why, I said earlier that they usually took the poor people to the hospitals. So
right.
when Poe was found and taken to the hospital and
Mhm.
his family, Muddy didn't have the money to
Right.
bury him and nobody else was kind of around to do anything. So,
Right. Exactly. And not until later. And
mhm.
so, but I wanted to, add that to the practices because, it was like the after effects of the mourning, of the period of grief when people were honoring the dead. And,
Yeah.
if families had money or someone had the money to give to a family for these grave markers, some were extremely ornate because for whatever reason, they wanted to honor that person grandly rather
Hmm.
than just a small stone with their name. And so it's
Yeah.
very
It,
interesting how that has evolved.
Yeah, it was another practice. And you also have to think that in those days, the population growth and the areas that
Yes.
people were living in,
Mhm.
they could build those things. They
Yes.
would have that big areas and
Hmm.
everything like that. And then even now, if you've ever visited any of the old cemeteries for
Hmm.
like I know one of my friends, she's dead now, but she was a history teacher and we loved going on what Julie liked to say our grassy knoll trips.
Yes.
She's the science person in the group, so she wasn't the
Right.
history person.
Yeah.
So she liked calling them the grassy knolls, but we would visit Civil War cemeteries.
Hmm.
And you could definitely see the difference between the modern and the old because in
Yes.
Chattanooga, the
Yeah.
cemetery with the National Cemetery in Chattanooga we went to, there is this giant locomotive
Hmm.
that was created in honor of this young child that died because he
Okay.
loved trains
Yeah.
and he died in that time. And so they built this mausoleum or tombstone that looks like a locomotive.
Wow.
And it just, and then all the newer side
Hmm.
are just the small, just tombstone, they're just round,
Yeah.
have their names, their dates of deaths, and maybe one line or something on them. So a
Yeah.
lot of that is because they're running out of room.
Absolutely. Well, and I was going to share that, when my dad died in 1982, his the cemetery where he's buried in Memphis, all of the gravestones are flat, they're bronze. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember asking my mother because I actually got to go with her to help pick out his gravestone, which ended up obviously being hers too on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking her, why don't we have the tombstones that look basically like what's behind me in the picture?
Mm-hmm.
And she said she asked that question and to the funeral home, and the reason is it was efficiency. The people that are mowing the grass, if they can just mow right over, like if they could just go right over these headstones,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't hurt anything. And so
Yep.
that made sense to me. I was like, okay, I accept that. But I
Yeah.
had
I
to
mean,
know.
it makes sense. I mean, and there's a place that a lot of my family members are, it's called Rest Haven,
Hmm.
and they have those bronze placards that are just on the ground.
Flat. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really efficient and like you said, probably cost effective.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all
So,
right. Well, let's move on to embalming.
yes, gotta go to the embalming
Well, and
because that's a lot of people don't understand that embalming was not around until it became a necessity in the Civil
right.
War.
Even though it dates back to ancient Egypt.
Yes. Well, ancient Egypt, their embalming was just basically jerking your insides out
Right.
and putting them in little things because you won't need your brain or your heart
Right.
or your kidney or lungs or I don't remember what the five ones they were,
It was, yeah,
but I know the brain was one.
heart, lungs, brain, uh,
Kidneys,
eyes, maybe?
liver. I
Liver.
think
Yeah.
liver was
Yeah, I think you're
one,
right. Yes.
and yeah, eyes. It was
And
eyes,
I may have that
brain.
wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, but I know definitely it was liver, heart, and brain
Yeah.
because they'd stick a thing up to your nose and
Oh, I
drag it
know.
out that way.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Moving on.
so
Moving on.
yeah, their
This
type of
is
embalming
science. This is
wasn't,
science.
it is science, but we're doing a little bit of everything. But in
The
these
softer
days,
science.
preserving bodies was relatively new in the 1800s by the way they were doing it
Right. Right.
because they were first soaked in arsenic or alcohol,
Yes. And I think that
about
was
3 pounds
around,
per body.
wasn't that about 1859 when that was introduced?
Yes, it was right at the before the beginning of the Civil Wars when they started practicing it.
Yeah, I think I looked up the first. Well, no, no, no. I take that back. Yeah, arsenic was
Mhm.
used through 1859, and then
Mhm.
a Russian chemist named Alexander Butlerov was the first
Mhm.
one to use synthetic formaldehyde, is
Yes.
what I looked up.
Yes.
Okay.
And because they would use arsenic or alcohol,
Hmm.
because one of the things with the alcohol that some of the family members were stored in barrels of whiskey
I saw they
until
were
they could be
pickled. Yes, they were pickled.
yes, they were pickled in barrels of whiskey
Oh, I was
until
like,
they could properly buried.
yes. And then also too, there was something that said that they also used honey and they used wax too. And I had never
Yes.
heard of that.
Well, I can understand with the wax because the wax pretty much kind of dries out
Yes.
because part of the things that they would use for is because they were trying to drain all the excess fluid
Hmm.
in the body. Like that's one of the things when a body dies and they're laying flat, the blood and everything pulls down out of the body.
Right.
It all just like goes to the bottom and then everything starts decomposing around it.
Hmm.
So then the body starts bloating all the organs and everything. So a lot of it they needed to figure out ways of basically decomposing things
Yeah.
and getting them out of the way so they could do that. And the first embalming methods in the United States started in the medical schools in the early 19th century.
Yeah.
So they were practicing because,
Yeah.
like what you said with the 1832, where they were using cadavers.
Hmm.
So they would use the students to study the soft tissues on the human cadaver to
Yeah.
see what they could use. And they also used a zinc chloride.
Oh,
It's a base
interesting.
compound for preservation of dead flesh.
Okay.
And but many of the earlier embalming compounds contained deadly poisons
Hmm.
like arsenic. So it was
Yeah.
very it was very common that most of those people that practiced that, like with the photographers, many
Yes.
people don't understand those that practiced the early times of photographers, they did not live long because they died from smelling all
Touching
those
it.
chemicals. Yes,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
touching it and smelling it. But it was during the American Civil War that the most famous doctor was Dr. Thomas Holmes.
Hmm.
He was considered the father, father, father of modern embalming by the war's end, and he boasted embalming over 4,000 men.
Wow.
And he also discovered and promoted safer embalming fluids.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yes, but they do say that a doctor by the name of Auguste Bouchard, or no, Auguste Renard. Sorry, my brain is like failing me at the moment.
It's all right.
Auguste Renard was one of the early ones, also of the doctors who
Hmm.
started some of those practices
And I
in
think
the
that,
America.
and I think, wasn't it this the information I found that a lot of the embalming really became more a regularity around the 1880s. Is that?
Yeah, the industry competition started rising around that time.
Mhm.
But the real big thing that started it was the Civil War.
Right. And who is that behind you, Jeanie, that really kind of made it, I don't want to say fashionable to be embalmed, but
Yeah,
'cause I don't like using that word for this, but it
the
became,
traditional. He kind of
yes,
kicked off the
yes,
tradition of being embalmed
yes,
due to his procession, and
right,
that was President Abraham Lincoln.
yes.
That's the guy that's laid out behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, that guy that's got his hand in his jacket at,
Yes.
to
The
Abraham Lincoln's
be the
left
right,
there.
he'd be the right of him.
No, the
That
way
guy is
Abraham
dead.
Lincoln's like, because Mary Todd's right there.
Right, right.
It's not the guy that's looking across him. It's the guy that's looking at the looking
Yeah,
facing him.
he's got his hand in his jacket and
Yeah,
okay.
that
Yes,
dude
that
right there.
guy. Yeah, that guy.
I'm pretty sure that's Andrew Johnson.
Okay. All right.
I can't remember because it's been a while since I taught that period,
Right.
and
Well,
but I'm pretty sure that's him because he was sworn in at that time as the president.
that's right. Yes. And so because they took Lincoln's body to Lyon State in multiple cities.
Yes.
So I did not find where it said like how many cities or what cities, but just the fact that that happened and embalming him was able to keep his body preserved enough that moving him around, it his body was,
I'm trying to remember, and I'm pretty sure it started in Philadelphia
okay,
because he was taken by train because the Lincoln train.
okay,
It was the same train trip because he was going to be buried in Illinois
okay, makes
or
sense.
Indiana. No, Illinois.
Yeah, Illinois, because that's
Yeah,
where he
Illinois.
was born. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yes, yeah,
Kentucky. He was born in Kentucky.
yes, that's what I was thinking. I was correcting myself.
Yeah, but he was buried in Illinois.
Yes,
Yes. Because that's where his family moved to, and
right.
that's where he was a lawyer. Okay,
Exactly. Yeah.
so if I remember correctly, that Philadelphia is where they put him on the train, and it was after he had laid in state in DC, after he was shot at the Ford Theater,
Mm-hmm.
and because it took him the next day to die. Um,
Right.
so the train left Philadelphia, and I believe it made a stop in three different places across because I'm trying to remember, I think it was the B&O Railroad
Mm-hmm.
line that he was on because it was
Okay.
on the transcontinental line that he was on. So yeah, I think it took at least 3 or 4 days for them to traverse from where they put him on the train
Okay.
to where the train ended.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes perfect sense. I was trying to see if I could find all the cities that he went to.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because trying to access my brain memory at the moment is not.
yeah, there's a website called the Lincoln Train Museum.
Mhm.
And let's see. On April 21st, 1865, the train carrying the coffin of President Abraham Lincoln on its
DC, not
way
Philadelphia. Sorry.
on its way to Springfield, Illinois, where he would be buried on May 4th. The route retraced his journey in 1861 to DC. It was the Lincoln Special. And I was trying to
Hmm.
see if it showed. Let's see. Let's see.
The locomotive number 119.
It just mentions Columbus, Ohio, Herkimer, New York, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania,
Hmm.
and let's see. I don't see anything else. But yes, yeah, he is buried in Illinois, like you said.
Yeah, it was Springfield, Illinois. Because it was the morning of April 19th, 1865, when the train left out of Washington's Central Depot.
Hmm.
And mhm. Wow, it went over a lot of. Yeah, and one of that is because, railroads were really not put into place until the Civil War because it had to connect
Hmm.
the East to the West.
Right.
So the funeral car actually had originally been intended as a lavish presidential office on wheels. It was the 19th century version of Air Force One.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but then it ended up being Abraham Lincoln's funeral car.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's kind of ironic in one way and apropos in the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one other thing I was going to say, I wanted to mention before we go is
Hmm.
how many different stories Poe talks about burial and things of that nature. Because, you've got the premature burial, you've got the oblong box, you bless you, and you've got,
Hold on. Sorry, excuse me. I go in threes, remember?
that's right.
Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry, start
Yeah.
this up again.
Yes, and so bless you, just in case you sneeze
Thank you.
again. Yes, I said the premature burial, oblong box, the fall of the House of Usher. We have a premature burial in the Castle
Hmm.
of Amontillado. You have a premature burial, just a little bit different. And
Yeah.
then you also have some words with a mummy. So you're talking about a mummification from the Egyptian times. And we're not going to talk about that too much because Jeannie will go on a tirade. And
Uh-huh.
then, and then technically, kind of the facts in the case of M. Valdemar, you have a death that happens,
Hmm.
but in a totally different way. Uh,
True.
you've also have there was one I was thinking of and I'm forgetting. Telltale Heart, there is the murder, but that's not really it is burial. It is a type of burial.
Yeah.
And those are just some of the ones just I can name kind of on off the top of my head. Any
Yes.
forgotten that, in the Black Cat there is a premature burial.
Yeah.
So there's quite a
Um,
few.
well, if you did you say cask of Amontillado?
I did, yes.
Okay, I thought so. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure. I think you said it maybe when I was sneezing.
Oh yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
So yeah, I think that's
I know I'm
yeah.
forgetting some, but that's, those are the,
Those are the highlights of the ones that are
yeah.
most
Well, oh,
remembered.
Berenice. Berenice's another.
Yes, yes, that's
Yes.
another one.
Yes. I knew I was forgetting one that was on my mind. And so that's just something to think about. And that's one of the reasons we decided to have this topic tonight for our science fiction, because
Hmm.
or the science part of it, because the premature burial, when you think about the horrific nature of it, and just also thinking about Poe lived in Victorian times and
Hmm.
all the superstitions that came about from being buried alive and all the details and the specifics and the regulations of mourning practices and funeral practices, we just felt like it was a very important topic to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that it's a day, it's a time of what was going on in
And Poe wrote
Poe's
a lot
world.
about it. So
Yes, and
my involvement,
especially in
but
his
yeah.
his world.
Yeah, but it's all very fascinating. Definitely.
Yes, it is. And hold on, I'm counting right now all the different places, and it was the B&O Railroad. It was the
Okay.
Baltimore and Ohio Railroad.
Yes. Yes.
So they left DC, went to Harrisburg, Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Let's see, then Baltimore, uh, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I said Philadelphia.
Yeah. Hmm.
New York City, New York.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, they were having processions in every one of these places.
Yeah. It makes sense. It really,
Albany, they went to Albany.
yeah.
Now, this started on April the 19th, and they were in Albany, New York on April the 25th.
Yeah.
And they were pulled by the locomotive called the Constitution,
Hmm.
which I thought was very ironic too. But
Oh, yeah.
Buffalo, New York, they spent a lot of time in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Cleveland, Ohio, 36 gun salute. I'm not counting these, I'm just saying them, but Columbus, Ohio.
Well, and one thing to add, Lincoln was the first president to be embalmed. And
Hmm.
another little Poe connection is that Lincoln and Poe were born the same year,
Hmm.
just a little less than a month apart. That's what's so
Mm,
cool.
mm-mm. Poe was born in January. Abraham Lincoln was born in November,
February.
February. He died. No, wait a minute.
Yeah.
He said the Gettysburg Address in November. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah. So yeah, January
Yeah,
19th,
he was born
Poe
February the
12th.
12th.
Yes.
I should know that. I was born February the
I
14th.
know.
I always got President's Day off. I should know this. All right.
Yes.
Anyway, Indianapolis, Indiana. So yeah, 1809, they were born both the same year. So that was, you know, Poe was only a month older than him.
Yes, exactly. Little less than a month.
Chicago, good Lord. Good thing they did embalm him. Springfield. On May the 3rd, Lincoln's body arrived at his hometown of Springfield, where he had lived from 1837 until his departure for Washington in 1861. Yeah, sorry, my little um,
It's all
I
good.
slipped there.
Yes.
So yeah, that took April 19th until May, what did I say, the 4th?
Third, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, 3rd.
Okay.
So yeah, good thing that he was embalmed.
Yes, absolutely. They would not have been able to do that if he wasn't.
No,
Yeah.
not at all. So, but
Well,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
we have wrapped everything up.
yeah, we have
Victorian,
buried this.
yes, we have buried these Victorian customs.
Yes, we have. We have buried them. We have talked them to death.
They're
Sorry.
not pre and it's not premature.
No. And we also know that Poe was not embalmed. So when he was buried with everything.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's sad to say
Yeah.
because was he even buried? He would only think he was buried in a box.
Yeah,
So
he was. He was.
he was.
Yeah, he was buried in a box. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, we are well versed in the practices of the funerals of the early 19th century.
yes.
So we have uh well and truly buried Poe.
Yes. And on
That note,
well, I want to say one thing beforehand.
okay.
We do our thing.
Yeah.
So just dear Mr. Poe, died on this day in 1849, and we miss him
Yes.
forevermore.
Yep. Forevermore.
Yes,
You will be in our hearts, Mr. Poe.
absolutely. And so now
On that note, we
we
are
are
Poe
out.
Hark, echo, hark, echo. 'Tis the sound of archangels in happiness wrapped.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Not now, Poe.